Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Novelists are a special breed. We've had several of them on over the past several weeks. They're able to create and alter reality, to suspend reality for a while, and get us to accept their portrayal of reality, the fulcrum where the real, the unreal, good and evil seem to teeter on the fulcrum. My guest today is one of those special people. C.P. Lesley, otherwise known as Carolyn Ponce, Dr. Carolyn Ponce, is my guest today. She's an author, has one book out, another one on its way out, and many, many more, I suspect. Welcome to 30 Minutes. Delighted to have you here.
My pleasure.
I was looking forward to talking with you about your book because I'm always interested in how authors get started. And once started, how they keep it up, churning out one book after another and living in that altered state and somehow operating on a day-to-day basis, but keeping one foot in reality and another in the world that you create for yourself, and then invite us in. As we always do, we begin with who you are, where you're from, where you were born, where you're educated, and how you got here.
Okay.
Which one of those would you like to answer?
It's a lot of big questions. Where I was born, I was born in England. My parents are Scots, and I spent the early part of my life in England. And we moved here in 1964. My father was a candy man. He worked for M&M Mars.
Oh, really?
And he he started as a chemist, and he had been in research. It's hard to imagine that M&M Mars does research, but they do.
Not at all.
And then in England, he had been moved into production, and he was offered a chance to go back into research if he would move to Chicago. So when I was 11 years old, we picked up and moved to Chicago. My mother nearly turned around and went home after the first year because they had 63 inches of snow, which was more snow she had ever seen in her entire life.
You about that? They missed that part.
Yes, they missed that part. But they convinced her to stay, and eventually we moved to northern New Jersey again for M&M Mars. And after that, I went to Mount Holyoke. So my parents continued to move around, but I was no longer part of that. And from there, I moved to Boston, where I met my husband, and then I decided to go to grad school. And I had been a Russian major in college. I had taken Russian in high school, and so when I was considering going to grad school, I decided, initially I was going to go in American history, and then I decided, no, I had the background in Russian, I'd go in Russian history. And so I went to Stanford. And at that point, the job situation was so bad in history that they literally sent out letters with the application saying, don't expect to get hired when you get out. But I figured I was working in a library, and I could always go back to working in a library if I had to. So I went to grad school, and I had never, during any of that, I mean, I was always a reader. I loved to read, but it had never occurred to me to write fiction. So I was not one of these people who started when she was young, which probably would have been a good thing in retrospect if I had, but I didn't. And so I actually started writing fiction 15 years ago when I wrote down a story that I had been thinking about, and then expanded from there.
Do you remember what it was like when, for whatever reason, on that particular day, at that particular time, you decided to sit down and actually start writing?
Well, the thing was, I didn't sit down with the idea that I was going to write a novel. I sat down to write down. I had been working over the story in my head for a long time. For as long as I can remember, I have always told myself stories before I went to sleep. And over time, the stories would change. But I would do one part of it, and I would get it to the end, and then I would start it all over again.
You mean write them down, or just
No, just in my head. Just in my head.
Yeah.
And on this particular occasion, I had this one scene worked out exactly the way I wanted it, and I thought, I'll write that down so I'll remember it. And then I started to write the scenes that went before and after it, and before I knew, I had like a quarter of a novel. So that was how it started, was that I had just intended to write this one scene. So it didn't occur to me at the time that I was moving into a new line of work, so to speak. But I found I really liked writing fiction. Because as a historian, we have to work with documents, we have to stay with the facts, you know. And So this is like a relaxation for me. This is exploring emotions and imagining
Right.
things and just making things up. And so it's a lot of fun.
As an historian, obviously you've done a lot of writing,
Mm-hmm.
heavy treatises of one kind or another.
Insomnia cures in many cases.
But-
We tend to be very specialized.
Before we go much farther, what we're talking about is this book.
Yes.
The Not Exactly Scarlet Pimpernel, author being C.P. Lesley, which is really Carolyn Ponce Lesley,
Yes.
right?
Lesley is my middle name, my original middle
Lesley
name.
is your middle name. Okay. And we'll be seeing more of C.P. Lesley. We'll talk about
certainly
that
hope so,
in
yes.
a few minutes. But this is your first novel,
It is, and it is historical fiction, let me mention.
historical fiction.
Yes.
Okay.
I only write historical fiction, really.
You only write historical, and most of it having to do with, well, no, this one isn't Russian.
Well, no, that one is not Russian.
Yeah.
No, that one is French.
What was the inspiration for this one? I know Scarlet Pimpernel, you said, was your favorite, one of your favorite novels?
Well,
Or no, did I read that is...
it probably isn't. I think that's what the character says. Yeah.
yes. See that?
But it is one of my favorite novels, too. Do you know the story of the original
Yes.
Scarlet Pimpernel?
Yes,
Okay.
I
well,
saw the movie
Yes. Okay, good enough.
with Leslie Howard.
So the
No,
original,
was it Leslie Howard?
yeah, it is
Was
Leslie Howard.
yes.
Yes, there's a later, better one that the BBC
Actually,
put out.
I think it
but-
was run on this station, Radnor Studio 21, because George Strimmel is an aficionado on British film.
Ah, yeah,
And
right.
I think, yeah, at any rate, there's a
Right.
plug for
So
the
it's
station.
referenced in the book, that movie. Yes, well, the basic idea of the original Scarlet Pimpernel is that he is the precursor to Batman, right? He is, he's a wealthy aristocrat who saves people from the guillotine during the French Revolution. And he is a master of disguise, and that's how he escapes the French, who, of course, are gunning for him. And he has an additional layer of disguise in that in his non-Scarlet Pimpernel persona, he pretends to be the stupidest man in England.
And a bit of a dandy.
And very much of a dandy,
Yes.
exactly. He's only concerned with clothes.
Yes.
And I read, when I was 14, my grandfather, who loved books also, gave me a copy of the original Scarlet Pimpernel, and I loved it. I mean, it's an adventure story, it's a romance, and at 14, you know, I didn't care about the writing. I mean, it's just,
Yes.
it kept me going, and I had pretty pictures and everything. And then I didn't think about it for years. But because my job requires me to look up a lot of books to check on whether the authors I'm editing, know what they're talking about, I spend a lot of time on Amazon.com because it's the easiest way just to find
Yes.
an ISBN or a price or something. And 5-6 years ago, Amazon.com, which, you know, I drive it crazy with my recommendations because I'm always looking for these books that are not mine, it threw up the Scarlet Pimpernel. It was the 100th anniversary of the original, and they had brought out an anniversary edition, and I looked at it, it was $5. I said, oh, I loved that when I was 14. Let's see how it stood up. So I read the book again, and, you know, now I'm 40 years older, and I've been married for 30 years, and I'm just fascinated by the conflict between these characters. The main character is Sir Percy and his wife. She's a French actress, and so she's not really radical. She doesn't support the terror, but she is certainly a lot more radical than he is. And he doesn't trust her for reasons that I won't go into. And so he doesn't tell her. And so she thinks he is, in fact, the stupidest man in England, and she's very unhappy about the whole thing. And I kept thinking, how would I solve that? You know, at what point could you change the story so that she doesn't end up betraying him, which is the sort of the crux of the original story. And that was the essence of this book. I sat down and wrote my version of what could have happened in 3 weeks. And what I didn't, and this was really my learning how to write a novel book. That's why it took me 6 years. But what I didn't fully grasp when I started to write it is that the whole point of a novelist's job is to create conflict. You have to keep things simmering so that the tension is high and so that people want to follow it and they want to know what's going to happen and how it's going to work out. So Baroness Orczy, who wrote the original, had done that, and I promptly undid it, and so 50 pages in, I didn't have a story anymore. So at that point, I had to create my own conflict and my own story. And so the whole central part of the story, which involves a computer game and these characters working out.
And that's what's so intriguing about it.
Yeah.
Explain how that works.
All right. Well, the computer game was the part that I got to last, right? So initially I had this story about these characters pretending to be the characters in the Scarlet Pimpernel. And then I had to come up with a story for them. And that's the part that I spent, I mean, originally, you know, like 60% of the book is what I wrote in 3 weeks. And then the other 40% took me 6 years. Because I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And after 2 or 3 years, I was so sick of it, I couldn't stand rewriting it again. I'd send it out to agents, I'd talk to critique partners, I'd rewritten it again. And I finally just thought, well, I'll put it on hold for a month because I've got this idea for this other book, which is the manuscript I have here. Well, that took me a while to write, too. So it was 2 years before I got back to it. So the whole thing actually only took me 4 years because there were 2 years when I wasn't working on it in the middle of it. And then finally, I came up with the plot for the computer game, and more importantly, the plot for the seminar. Because what's actually happening in this book is that there are a group of grad students who are in history. They're all specialists in the French Revolution. And they all want to work with the new young popular professor. And he's got so many students already that he can't take them, all 5 of them. So he says, well, you're going to go into this game. That's part of the requirement for the seminar. And the 2 kids who do the best are the ones who will work with me, and everybody else is out of luck. So that immediately creates conflict.
Conflict, yes.
And it creates what a novelist would think of as good conflict, which is not just people yelling at each other, but the ideal conflict situation is something like the Maltese Falcon, where there's something that everybody wants and only one person can get it. And you can have good reasons or bad reasons or whatever, but that's what you're looking for in a novel, is something that only only your characters, only the protagonists can eventually come out on top.
Did you know? Well, I guess the answer is no, because it took you 6 years altogether. So
right.
The question, however, is, did you know how you were going to get off stage early on in the book?
Yes.
You did. You
yeah.
knew
I always knew where I was
end.
heading. I always knew where I was heading, yes. The real question was just how to make the characters who are going to play the game have to be as interesting as the characters in the game. And so that's what it took me a while to
Other authors
develop.
I've met have, and I guess everyone has a different experience, even a unique experience, but just about every other author I've interviewed or talked with has said somehow the story reveals itself once you get into it. It's there. It exists. The story exists, and it reveals itself as you work your way through the storyline. Was that true in your case?
Well, I think it is true. There are various styles of writing a novel.
Yeah.
There are some people, especially people who write mysteries, where you really have to know everything as you're going in to make sure that you sow the clues correctly and everything, plot out everything. And other people really get into the serendipity of it all.
Yes.
I think it's always true that the story is there because it's coming out of your subconscious.
Yes.
And so by definition, you feel it and you've developed it before you really recognize what it is. I have, all the way through this book, I tended to just have a very vague idea of where I was going. Now, because I don't want to spend 4 years on each one of them, I've started plotting out. But what I find is that when I actually get into the story, things come to me that aren't in the outline.
Yeah.
So I have, even with the new one that I'm working on, which is called The Winged Horse, I have a very clear idea, much clearer than I ever had with these two, of not just where I'm going, but how I'm going to get there. And yet, I've written 2 chapters, and things have come to me while I was writing them that play into the overall story, but I hadn't outlined them. I hadn't imagined them.
Are you a morning writer, an afternoon writer, an evening writer? Is
Well,
there a
I do
time
this
of
in my
day?
spare time, so I'm a whenever I can fit it in writer.
So you write in spurts, or do you try to block out?
I spend every weekend writing,
You do.
basically. And during the day I work as an editor. An editor is sort of like fine motor movements, so I can do that for about 6 hours and then I can't see anything. So if things are going well, then I have an hour at the end of the day when I'm not doing anything else.
And how do you deal with writer's block, or are you not ever afflicted with that?
I have not often had a problem with writer's block. First of all, I'm a plot-first person. There are plot-first people and character-first people. And so I can make up, plot incidents just on the whole. So I don't have that big problem. I have occasionally found that if I'm trying to force a character,
Yes.
especially a main character, to do something, and it's not right for the character,
Yes.
then I can't hear them, the dialogue dries up. It sounds kind of crazy when you're talking about being a novelist, because you really hear these people talking in your head.
Yeah, no, I understand.
And then I have to stop and think, so what is it that I'm trying to make this person do, and why is it not right for them? And if I find that, then I can go back to writing.
Is there a single lesson you learned from this experience as a writer, as a novelist, that is carried over to your second novel and either made it easier or didn't?
Think a lot more about the characters.
Think a lot more about the
characters,
characters.
who they are, really work who they are, what their issues are, what they want.
How do you do that? I mean, do you literally develop a profile for each character?
Yep.
Characteristics, physical traits, the nuances, the personality?
I think the best book on writing I have ever read is by a woman named Deborah Dixon. It's called Goal, Motivation, and Conflict. And she says for every single character in your book, because this is from someone else, this is not Deborah Dixon's line, but it's a great line. Every character in the book thinks that it's their story, right? Just as we do in real life. We're all the hero of our own story. So if you take Dixon's Goal, Motivation, and Conflict and apply it to every story person who's not just a walk-on, you can start to see who those characters are. Because what that means is, for the hero has outward goals. Like Bill Clinton wants to be president. But then he also has an internal goal. What drives Bill Clinton to want to be president? I don't want to be president. So that you have an internal goal and an external goal, and then you have to find out what the motivation is for that. So with this new book, the heroine's brother is killed early on, and so she wants vengeance for the killing, but she also wants to fit into her society, and so she has an internal goal and an external goal. And then there's something that gets in the way. There's something that prevents. So for each character, you should be able to say, Ninel wants this because of this, but
You're turning into an amateur psychologist.
Yeah, absolutely.
This book, The Not Exactly Scarlet Pimpernel by C.P. Lesley, an historical novel, is available where?
It is available online at Amazon.com. It's available as an ebook for Kindle and Nook, and also at the iTunes bookstore. And that's it, basically.
Okay.
You can order it through a bookstore, though, if you want.
What is it? What's the price?
It's $12.99.
What a value! What a bargain!
For the print, the ebook is only $4.99 because there is.
And I like it because it's at least 12-point type.
Yes.
For those of us who have a problem with that. Now let's talk about the other book, because that is more closely related to your specialty, which is Russian history.
Yes. Specifically 16th century.
And is the first in a
Ivan the
series,
Terrible.
right? This is going to be.
This is the first in a series. Yes.
All right. What does that mean?
Well,
and why? Why? I mean, you're going from 6 years to you're going to pump one of these out every 6 months.
Well, I was actually going to turn that into a series because I really like the idea of the computerized.
The game.
Yeah, the computer game and being able to rework your favorite novel. But I just didn't find another novel that I wanted to work with in the same way that I did the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Well, after 6 years, I'd be fed up with it. ready to move on.
Also, now that I've set it up at the seminar, is this guy going to make every seminar do something? It's a little old after a while. with the golden lynx, what
The golden lynx.
the golden lynx, and there is the lynx.
Yeah.
The lynx, and this is the heroine.
Yes. Who is 16 years old.
She's 16 years old, and she's a Tatar. Tatars are the descendants of the Mongol conquerors who came through Russia in the 13th century and mingled with the Turkic peoples, because they're all Turkic. They were speaking similar languages. And so the result is the Tatars. And her particular family is one of the things that the Russians did. I mean, the Russians were a very conservative Orthodox Christian state. But for practical reasons, because they had been conquered by the Mongols, they, for a long period of time, the Mongols were on the top. And so the Muscovites were particularly successful at negotiating with the Mongols and adopting a lot of their political systems, which explains a lot of Russian history. And they began, one of the things about the Mongols was that they couldn't get along with one another. And so eventually they split up into all these different groups. And as they did, the Russians were getting stronger, and so they were able to take out a lot of these groups individually. And they were able to pull in people who were losing these various inter-Mongol fights as princes, and they set them up. So inside of this very conservative religious state were these little pockets of Islam.
Yes.
Because the Mongols in that particular part of the world had converted to Islam. So my heroine is a princess in one of these little pockets of Islam.
Which takes place when?
And it takes place in 1534.
1534.
For two reasons.
Good year.
One is that this is the moment in time when the Mongols and the Russians are just like this. It has been Mongols and Russians, and 20 years later it's going to be Russians and Mongols, but right now they're right in the middle. And so even though it's not what you would expect, this girl is extremely prestigious in a Russian context. She is a descendant of Genghis Khan, and therefore she is actually higher status than all of the Russian noblemen. She's the equivalent of the Russian Tsar, although at this very moment there is no Russian Tsar. They haven't come up with that one yet. And at this moment in time, so the second reason is that at this moment in time, Ivan the Terrible is 3 years old, and his father has just died. And for the Russian system, this is a major crisis, because the entire political system depends on whose family has managed to marry the Grand Prince. And you can't marry a 3-year-old. The Catholics kind of fudged with this in Europe for a long period of time, but the Orthodox were much stricter. You had to be at least 12. And so, so the whole system is up in flux, which is a great time for a novelist, because there's all this conflict.
Yes.
And it's a great time in general, because there are no cell phones, there's no police, there's no computers. People don't know what's going on. Half the population can't read.
Yeah.
So people can get lost, people can go missing, people can misunderstand each other. There's no, there are no DNA tests, there's no fingerprinting, there's all this, lots of wild things can happen without anybody being able to stop them.
What's the origin of the title, The Golden Lynx?
Well, yes, so when I originally started this, it was a mystery story for a husband and wife, because one of the characteristics of Russia in this time was that men and women were secluded, elite women, almost like a harem. And so men and women didn't interact. But then, so as part of that, because girls in the 16th century didn't live very interesting lives, I made the heroine. At that time, she was a half Tatar, so she would, be able to ride and do other interesting things. And so when I revamped the novel, I made her a full Tatar, so that she had grown up in a nomadic camp, and she could, wield a sword and shoot things. And that's the basis of the story, is that once she finds herself in an unhappy marriage, she fights back, in effect, by going out on the streets and helping people. She becomes a kind of Scarlet Pimpernel.
Ahead of her time.
Yes. And because of the world that these people live in, they're formerly Muslim, but only very recently in historical terms. And so there's a lot of pagan spirituality in that. And the lynx is actually a character who shows up on behalf of the sky god to get the story going. And there's a lynx in the first chapter that kind of runs around, and then her brother gives her a pendant with a golden lynx on it. And so when she is out on the street, people see this pendant, and so that's how she becomes known as the golden lynx. So she is the golden lynx.
And there's a line here on the cover, Legends of the Five Directions.
Yes,
one.
That is the series, yeah.
And what is West?
Well,
Oh.
West. West is the first book.
Okay. And
the five in Chinese cosmology, which the Mongols adopted after they conquered China, there are 5 directions, not just north, south, east, and west, but the center is also considered a direction. And in Mongol cosmology, the center is where what connects the heavens to the lands of the dead below, and it runs directly through the center. So in a Mongol, you know those round Mongol yurts?
Yes.
There's a smoke hole, which is considered to be, and it connects the hearth to the heavens and then down below. And so there will be 5 books. That's why there are 5 books in the series, because this one is west, which from a Tatar perspective, Russia is. And then the one I'm writing now is east.
With the same characters or introducing different characters?
This character, the main character, and her husband are in the second book too, but they're their sub-characters. The main character in the second book is her brother, who is in there.
And do you now know what this sequence will look, what the storylines will be for each one? Or is that still evolving?
I know the full storyline for the second book, and I have a pretty good idea what's going to happen in book 3.
Yeah.
All of the same characters will recur. The fourth one is going to feature who's basically the bad girl in this one. And then the 5th one is another character who will bring the whole thing together.
You obviously write because you love to write. And having this now as the first love of your life, at least in your literal life. Now you've got this whole family that you're aborting and raising. What do you hope is going to happen as a result of all of this? Is there a movie here and a television script there? Have you thought beyond the print?
Well, at the moment, I would be happy if it actually sold.
You good old-fashioned way. All right.
But I'm told that I'm a very visual writer, and this one is certainly, you know, Cecil B. DeMille would be perfect for it because it's got a cast of thousands. I mean, it could choose.
And it is 400 or so pages. This is only 290-some pages.
Right. Yeah. No, that was 450. It goes for a while. But you know, with real historicals, you have to do a lot of scene setting. So there's a lot of description.
Will this be paperback as well, or will this be hardcover?
It will be a paperback as well, right?
Okay.
Because we have this little indie press, we can't really afford hardcovers yet.
No, I'm serious about at least bringing it to the attention of some people who might be interested.
I would love to. I mean, I really would. One of the ways that I write, because I am very visual, so I have this program called Storyist, which lets me keep little pictures of all my characters.
Yes. And
so one of the things I do when I'm wasting time is I go on Google Images and I find all these pictures of movie stars who represent my mental image. So
interesting.
My husband cast Maggie Gyllenhaal for Nina way back. So she's although we're going to have to find another hero, because I had my mental image is a very young image of Alan Rickman, and I think he's a bit old for Sir Percy at this point. You
reminded me of something I'm reading now. I'm reading a book on effective communication and presentations, and really effective presenters who story is obviously very important, storytelling. But within that, conflict and resolution.
Right.
And the point is made, particularly with this generation, the millennials, that they thrive on conflict and want a resolution of conflict in their own lives, and are probably the most receptive to really good storytelling. And as an educator, as a leader, as a whatever. So that was running through my mind as you were talking about the necessity for conflict in the works you produce. The control room is telling me we're just about out of time. I think I told you the time would fly by.
Yes, it did.
I'm delighted to have met you. I wish you best of luck with the Not Exactly Scarlet Pimpernel. Anyone who's interested can find it at Amazon and other good sources. Look forward to this one, which is coming out, will be published when? This The Golden Links, first in a series.
It should be at the end of August or the beginning, but the latest will be
In
the
the
middle
fall?
of September.
Yeah, in the fall? Okay. Well, the best of luck with that. And we'll have to have you back sometime in the future to find out whether or not you've been contacted by Hollywood or anyone else who might be interested.
And if you happen to know anyone, please tell them. There are all these great stories out there.
Delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
C.P. Lesley, watch for the name. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves and read a good book.